Hello friends, welcome to Stories 13 channel. This is a scary story for you, so make yourself comfortable and listen attentively, and please don't forget to subscribe. Thank you. The basement door wasn't there yesterday. Meet Martin, a quiet man who lived in an old family house on the outskirts of town. Ever since he could remember, he'd always lived alone in that house. His parents had passed away when he was still a young lad, and no other relatives wanted the old house, so it went to him. Of course, over time, everything changed, and that's how Martin ended up being the sole owner of the house. As the years passed, Martin never thought much about what lay beneath the house. That is, until one morning he was making his way to the kitchen to get some water. He must have been thirsty because he hadn't drunk any water the entire day. While walking, he accidentally bumped into something hard. "What the hell?" he said out loud. It was a door. He felt its surface with his hands. It was smooth, cold, and damp. He pushed it open, but it didn't budge. Then he pushed it again, harder this time, and the door swung inward with a heavy sound. Startled, Martin took a few steps back. He stared at the door, unsure what to do next. But then curiosity got the better of him, and he walked toward the door. It was only when he got close that he realized the door wasn't there yesterday. He tried to remember if he had seen it before, but nothing came to mind. It was neither the entrance to a pantry nor a closet. No matter how hard he racked his brain, he couldn't figure out where the door led. It looked very old, ancient even, like it had been carved from wood that had been taken down from a centuries-old tree. There was no handle and no lock, just an oval-shaped protrusion where a knob should have been. With no other choice, Martin put his hand on the protrusion and turned it slowly. To his surprise, the door opened without making a sound. Martin hesitated for a moment before stepping inside. As soon as he entered, the door slammed shut behind him, plunging him into total darkness. For a moment, he stood there, frozen, listening intently. All he could hear was his own heartbeat. He closed his eyes and began counting the seconds. Just when he was about to lose his nerve and turn back, he heard a creaking sound coming from the other side of the door. Slowly but surely, the door began to open. When it was fully open, Martin found himself staring into a pitch-black abyss. He could feel a draft coming from the opening, but he couldn't see anything else. Taking a deep breath, he reached out to touch the wall beside him. It was cold, damp, and rough. Hesitantly, he stepped forward. Every step he took echoed loudly in the confined space. He continued going down, past the first step, then the second, and soon enough, he had descended several steps, each one colder than the last. Just when he thought he couldn't go any deeper, another step appeared under his foot. Curious and somewhat frightened, Martin continued descending. The tunnel seemed endless. The temperature dropped significantly, sending shivers down Martin's spine. He pulled his jacket tighter around him, but it did little to ward off the growing chill. The air grew thick and heavy, making it difficult for him to breathe. Still, he pressed on, his determination to reach the end of the tunnel unwavering. As he descended further, he noticed faint whispers echoing around him. They seemed to come from the walls themselves, whispering secrets in a language he couldn't understand. The whispers grew louder, weaving together to form words, but he couldn't decipher what they were saying. They seemed to be speaking about him, yet their words remained a mystery. Despite the unsettling whispers, Martin pressed on, his curiosity overcoming his fear. And then, suddenly, the tunnel opened up into a small chamber. The sight before him made him gasp. In the center of the room was a staircase spiraling upwards, disappearing into the darkness above. The whispers seemed to come from the stairs, beckoning him to climb higher. But as he stared at the staircase, another detail caught his eye. Something lay at the base of the stairs, something that sent a jolt of recognition through him. It was a door, almost identical to the one he had come through, except this one was slightly ajar. With a mix of apprehension and intrigue, Martin approached the door and pushed it open. The room beyond was dimly lit, revealing a staircase leading downward into darkness. On the other end of the staircase was another door, which he pushed open and stepped through. He found himself in a large, dusty room filled with all kinds of old stuff: trunks, furniture, paintings, books, and more. It was like stepping back in time, as if the room had been abandoned decades ago. As he explored further, he noticed a photograph lying on one of the trunks. He picked it up and examined it closely. It was a picture of a young boy standing in front of the same house he currently lived in. The boy's name was written on the back of the photograph, and sure enough, it was his name. But it wasn't him in the picture. He knew that much. Looking at the clothing and the style of the house in the background, he estimated that the photo was probably taken 40 to 50 years ago. He wondered who this boy was and why he had his name. Did his parents have another son, but they had only him? Why would they hide such an important thing from him? At that moment, he heard a voice behind him. "Who are you?" he asked. The voice replied, "I am you." Confused, Martin turned around, but there was no one there. "Who said that?" he asked. There was no answer. He looked at the door through which he had entered, but it had vanished. He tried to find another way out, but it was no use. He was trapped. In the end, he decided to search the room thoroughly. After all, he was curious about who that boy was. Maybe he'd find some answers. Hours passed by, but he found nothing except for more old stuff. It was then that he realized he wasn't alone. He could feel someone watching him from a dark corner of the room, observing his every move. He tried to convince himself it was just his imagination, but the feeling persisted, growing stronger with every passing moment. Panic began to set in, and he started to run around the room, desperately searching for an exit. But no matter where he went, the walls seemed to close in on him, trapping him in an endless maze. Suddenly, the whispers returned, echoing around him, growing louder and more menacing with each passing moment. The sound of his own breathing filled his ears, amplifying his terror. Then, just as abruptly as it began, the whispering stopped, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. The sudden quiet was deafening, and Martin collapsed to his knees, overwhelmed by a sense of dread. That's when he noticed something strange. The door that had disappeared was back in its place. He rushed towards it and pushed it open. On the other side was the staircase leading upward. Without hesitation, he began to climb, each step taking him closer to the surface. When he finally emerged from the basement door, blinking against the bright light, he could hear the sound of birds tweeting and the gentle rustling of leaves in the wind. But all he could think about was the silence that had fallen over the house. It was a silence that seemed to consume him, a silence that whispered of secrets best left undisturbed. He shuddered, realizing that he might never fully escape the whispers that now echoed not just in the basement, but in the chambers of his heart.